The anime begins with him getting absolutely destroyed during training, fearing he might not survive. Despite his struggle, a group of onlookers is pleased to see his improvement over the past couple of years. They believe that the upcoming E-rank test will be a breeze for him. Later, Rick registers for the E-rank promotion tests. Alicia, the receptionist, is delighted to see him again after 2 years. She is surprised to learn that Rick has become an adventurer, given that he used to be a guild clerk. It's unusual for someone to start their adventuring career at age 30, as most begin as F-rank apprentices in their teens and progress to higher ranks within a couple of years. Alicia wonders where he has been, and Rick explains that he has been training in the mountains with senior adventurers. While Rick busy with his registration, a drunken knight tries to make advances toward Alicia. Rick intervenes and calms the situation, reminding everyone to drink responsibly. Alicia then hands Rick his exam ticket, wishing him luck. However, Rick is horrified to see that his ticket bears the unlucky number 4242. Outside, Rick informs a girl named Rianette that he has completed his registration. Rianette playfully reminds him to keep her eyes on him. Back inside, everyone is shocked to see an imprint of Rick's hand on the drunk man's steel armor. The drunk man, Domol the Fish Knight, is an infamous former A-rank adventurer and a wanted criminal. Alicia is stunned, realizing that Rick's strength has reached a level where he can leave an imprint on steel armor. A while later, Rick's height is measured, and the examiners are shocked to discover that he is 32 years old. Following this, participants have their magical energy tested by placing their hands on a crystal ball. A couple of guys score D-, and one girl receives a C+. When it's Rick's turn, the light he generates from the crystal is pathetic, earning him an F-. The other participants are astonished by such a low score and hope they never face such a fate. As Rick leaves, the examiner is startled to see the crystal ball suddenly break. In the next exam, participants are required to attack a device to measure the force they can generate. The device can absorb incredibly powerful attacks, so they are instructed not to hold back. The device is a slime bag, and a flashback reveals someone teaching Rick about it. He was told that the human body is the foundation of a good fighter, regardless of using weapons or magic. Rick was instructed to destroy the golden slime bag with his bare hands to build a body he could trust. This golden slime bag is known for being as tough as dragon's teeth. Although Rick doubted he could destroy it with his bare hands, his instructor assured him that it was simple for an adventurer. The instructor demonstrated his power, showing that he could destroy 200 of them at once. Rick then had to hit the bag with 50,000 punches every day to build his strength. Back in the present, one participant impresses everyone by attacking the bag using strengthening magic. Next, a small boy steps up, declaring that it is finally time to showcase his strength. This boy, the second son of the Duke, is rumored to have magic equivalent to an C rank despite being only 11 years old. The child prodigy shocks everyone with his grand display, but the attack turns out to be a tiny fireball. Despite its size, the fireball causes significant damage, and the crowd is impressed, calling him a genius. Rick is in awe as he watches the young boy's display of level 3 blaze magic. The attack, while impressive, prompts Rick to recall his own training. A flashback reveals a little girl using an immensely powerful fire attack on him. Despite both attacks being blaze magic, they look quite different. Rick wonders if the boy's fireball was compressed for indoor use. When it's Rick's turn, the examiner doesn't expect much. He believes that if magic isn't trained from a young age, significant growth later in life is nearly impossible. Given Rick's dismal results from the magic test, the examiner suggests that he should give up. Rick actually agrees with this assessment but reflects on his rigorous training. Exhausted from punching the bag one day, he had refused to quit. Though he acknowledges starting his journey late, Rick believes his age should not hinder his potential. Rick steps up to the bag and shocks everyone by destroying it with a single punch. He himself is surprised by his strength and wonders if the bag was particularly weak. The crowd watches in terror, unsure who he is. The young boy, furious at Rick for stealing the spotlight, plans to showcase his abilities during the defensive ability test. Moments later, everyone is stunned once again when Rick defends against level 4 nature-composed magic, something the boy couldn't manage. The examiner is astonished to learn that Rick used only level 1 magic to block the attack. Deciding to escalate the challenge, the examiner announces that he will use level 5 attack magic next. He suggests that Rick use a defense magic higher than level 1. Rick surprises everyone again by revealing that he can only use level 1 magic for both offense and defense. He reassures the examiner that he will be fine, which offends the examiner, who feels that Rick is underestimating him. Determined to demonstrate his superiority, the examiner begins his incantation and unleashes a level 5 magic attack. The immense power of the attack shocks everyone, even causing distant knights to express concern. One of these knights, named Sylvester, rushes to the arena, unable to believe that such a powerful attack is being used during an exam. Sylvester is informed about Rick and how he managed to block the level 5 magic attack with just level 1 defense magic. Initially, Sylvester assumes it must be some kind of joke, but he is told it's not. Rick is simply an exceptionally strong 32-year-old F-rank adventurer. Rick's report reveals his background as a guild receptionist for 13 years, which confuses Sylvester, as he seems unfamiliar with what a receptionist is. The impressive power displayed leads some to wonder if receptionist is a title given to someone who has defeated a dragon. After the written exam, Rick confidently states that he aced it. Just then, Freed, the prodigy, angrily approaches Rick. Rick barely remembers the kid and assumes he is lost, offering to help him find his parents. Freed is furious, explaining that Rick's actions stole attention from him. Freed's older sister, Angelica, arrives, upset that Rick made her brother cry. Freed claims that the 40-year-old man ruined everything, but Rick corrects him, clarifying that he is only in his 30s. Angelica, only believing her brother's version of events, challenges Rick to a duel. Rick points out that Angelica has just dirted her glove, but Rianette explains that picking up the glove means accepting the duel. Moments later, they arrive at an arena, where Angelica declares that she must punish the old man. In duels within the kingdom, each participant can propose a condition. Angelica proposes that the loser must act as the winner's servant for life. His brother cheers her on, and Angelica, being a second-class knight, is at the same level as a high-ranking adventurer. Rick is shocked to hear this, realizing that Angelica is powerful enough to defeat monsters on her own. Rianette urges Rick to take it easy on her, but Rick thinks she has it all wrong. He points out that he is just an F-rank adventurer who registered only a few days ago. Fearing he might not survive the duel, Rick is advised by Rianette to remember his training from the past 2 years. As a training montage plays in his head, Rick recalls the grueling experience, which makes him feel sick. Rianette encourages him to be more confident and reminds him of the group that trained him. The group called the legendary Orichalcum Fist prides itself on being the strongest in the continent, and they consider Rick to be one of its members. Rick thanks to Rianette for encouraging him, now full of confidence, steps up to face Angelica. Acknowledging that Rick is an F-rank adventurer, Angelica promises not to end his life. As the fight begins, Rick observes that Angelica is a swordsman who enhances her body and weapons. Angelica questions if he can keep up with her speed, and Rick is stunned when she effortlessly flies past him. She explains that she had intentionally slowed down a bit for him and wonders if he is silent due to shock. Freed, the little nerd, laughs at Rick, explaining that his sister is known as the Flash because of her incredible speed. Angelica declares that she will attack him without holding back this time. As she unleashes another incredibly fast attack, Rick remains quiet, but it's revealed that he perceives Angelica's movements as slower than a leisurely walk. He is bewildered by why she is called the Flash and easily dodges her attack. Angelica assumes it was merely a stroke of luck, noting that only a handful of first-class knights can properly react to her speed. Confident that he won't dodge her next attack, she prepares for another strike. Rick, however, is unimpressed and questions if Angelica's knight status is a result of nepotism rather than skill. Rick briefly considers that he might actually be strong but dismisses the thought with a laugh. As Angelica attacks again, she trips and barrels towards him. Rick barely manages to dodge her out-of-control assault. Oblivious to her actual stumble, he assumes it was a display of her incredible skill. This incident makes Rick realize the significant skill gap between him and a second-class knight like Angelica. Despite her trip, Angelica decides to play it off as a deliberate move and vows to attack again, this time with even greater speed. She uses an attack that takes a significant toll on her body, limiting her to only 2 more attempts. Her next strike, although meant to be much faster, still appears slow to Rick. He carefully dodges, fearing another powerful rolling attack. Angelica is frustrated, knowing she only has 2 more chances. She decides to use her remaining attacks in quick succession. As she attempts her final attack, she trips again. Rick, mistaking it for another complex technique, worries that he won't land his counter-attack in time. The arena is covered in dust from the collision. When the dust clears, everyone is shocked to see that Rick's attack has created a massive crater in the ground. Angelica is horrified, realizing that if she hadn't tripped, Rick's formidable attack would have hit her directly. Rick, still clueless, assumes that Angelica intentionally dodged his attack, leaving everyone puzzled about this mysterious F-rank adventurer who managed to impress even the seasoned knight. Rick explains that he's just an F-rank adventurer and that there used to be a good receptionist 2 years ago. He admits he's not sure he can do much against a second-class knight, but he promises to do his best during their duel and use it as a learning experience. Excitedly preparing to continue, Rick is stunned when Angelica suddenly surrenders. Fried is equally shocked, and Angelica declares that she will let Rick win this time. She tries to leave as quickly as possible, but Rick reminds her of the duel's conditions. Although Rick didn't propose any conditions himself, he's fine with accepting Angelica's. She, however, is reluctant to serve him for the rest of her life. Desperate to avoid this fate, Angelica pushes her legs to their limits and runs away. Rick doesn't consider it a true victory, but Rianette reminds them that it's time for the results of the preliminary test. Just then, Rick is shocked when Rianette reveals that their group members will be arriving soon. Terrified, Rick wonders what they are coming for, and Rianette explains that they want to see how he is doing. Rick has a bad feeling about their arrival, but it's too late as the others are already on their way. Meanwhile, the Akashic Record, a treasure that grants any wish, is said to be awarded to anyone who defeats the ultimate monster, Kaiser Alati. An adventurer had previously encountered the monster but was unable to defeat it. He hoped that one day, one of the upcoming adventurers would be able to vanquish the beast and redeem his failure. Alicia announces that the results of the third test will be released shortly. She explains that Mono will be sent to their exam tickets, and those who passed will see their tickets glow blue. The successful candidates will then participate in a mock battle in the second stage the following day. Rick is not in good spirits, doubting his chances of passing. Rianette consoles him, reassuring him that he will ace the test. She warns him that if he somehow fails, he'll need to triple his training, making Rick pray to all the deities to pass. Rick's ticket suddenly lights up, and he anxiously watches, hoping it will glow blue. After a tense moment, the ticket does indeed glow blue. Overjoyed, Rick informs Rianette of his success. She congratulates him, and they leave the classroom. Rick feels a sense of relief at not having to return to training. As they exit, a foul stench fills the air, and Rick wrinkles his nose in disgust. A noble approaches Rianette, introducing himself as Raster, the first son of the Duke of Diamond who rules the North. Rick struggles to remember his name and decides to call him Northie. Raster asks Rianette for her name, and she introduces herself. Impressed by how sweet Rianette's name sounds, Raster frowns at Rick, indicating he has no business with someone of his status. Rick is disheartened by this, but Raster disregards him and focuses on Rianette. He tries to impress her with his not-so-superior line, but fails to pique her interest. Undeterred, Raster continues, asking Rianette to become his second wife. As Raster makes his advances toward Rianette, Rick decides to intervene, which angers Raster. Raster is puzzled as to why an old man is being so nosy. Rick informs Raster that he should stop hitting on Rianette because she's his girlfriend. Raster is surprised by this revelation but is soon distracted by Rick's participation ticket, which makes him laugh. He can hardly believe that Rick is still an F-rank hero at his age. Assuming Raster is also there for the exam, Rick tries to turn the situation around, but Raster quickly dismisses his attempt, explaining that he reached S rank when he was just 14. Raster reveals that he is there to be an examiner for the second part of the exam due to his status as an A-rank adventurer. He proudly shows Rick his crest and asks Rianette to leave Rick, who he deems worse than a commoner, and join him for dinner instead. Rianette kindly declines, stating that she is dating Rick, who is so embarrassed that he nearly explodes. She also teases Raster about his disturbing perfume, which Rick now realizes is the source of the foul stench. Raster, angered by their insults, promises to demonstrate the difference in their capabilities if he ends up being Rick's examiner. He walks away, fuming and determined to prove to Rianette that she made the wrong choice. Rick worries about starting off on the wrong foot with his potential examiner and hopes Raster won't be the one overseeing his exam. Later, Raster heads to the castle for dinner, still seething from his encounter with Rick. Determined to prove his superiority, Raster is interrupted by Fried and Angelica running to him in tears. Surprised by their distress, Raster listens as Fried complains about being humiliated by an old man during the test, and Angelica recounts how the same man almost disgraced her during their duel. Raster, realizing that the old man they are referring to must be Rick, asks Fried for Rick's participant number. Fried reveals that Rick's number was an unlucky one, confirming Raster's suspicions. Pleased by the prospect of getting revenge on Rick, Raster looks forward to the opportunity to disgrace him during the second part of the exam. The next day, as Rick and Rianette walk to the location of the second test, Rianette reminds Rick to hold back. Rick, however, is apprehensive and explains that he can't hold back, especially since Raster turns out to be his examiner. Filled with dread at this possibility, Rick is suddenly stopped by a guy named Lynx, who informs him that he will be in charge of the tests in the second stage. Rick rejoices, relieved that Raster isn't his examiner. However, Lynx expresses how unusual it is for a 30-year-old receptionist to switch jobs and become an adventurer. Rick initially thinks Lynx is making fun of him, but Lynx explains that he is impressed by Rick's determination. Lynx, who became an adventurer at 24, feels a sense of déjà vu because he knows how difficult it is to achieve one's goals. He shares that despite being in his 40s, it took him 20 years to achieve a rank, which impresses Rick. Eager to face Lynx in the battle, Rick is warned that Lynx won't hold back, but Lynx offers him a handshake and invites him for a drink after the tests. Unbeknownst to them, Raster is silently eavesdropping on their conversation with a naughty smile. Lynx, having felt how much Rick has trained just by shaking his hand, decides to train even harder as he returns to his quarters. Meanwhile, Raster corners Rick and Rianette in the prep room to discuss the upcoming exam. Rick is cheerful, but the mood changes when a messenger arrives with news for participants numbered 4,200 and above. Lynx has fallen ill, and the new examiner will be Raster. Rick is shocked, and Rianette informs him that Raster is related to Angelica and Fried, as they all share the same surname. Other participants express their concerns, fearing Raster's reputation. Rianette wonders about the big deal, and a participant explains that Raster is nicknamed the F-Rank Crusher because he torments participants who grab his attention. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Rick knows he has not only gained Raster's attention but also his wrath. Raster enters a mock battle with one of the participants, easily defeating him with his nature-imposed ice magic and expressing his disappointment in the powerlessness of commoners. An elite guard suddenly calls Raster's attention to give him a message. Meanwhile, Rick is having a meltdown, worried about his predicament. Rianette tells him there's no point in worrying. Although Rick wants to go home, he remembers that his training would triple if he did, so he decides to make peace with the fact that he might not achieve his dreams. Rianette advises him to gain inspiration from those who doubted him instead of letting their words weigh him down. She assures him that he will pass the test and defeat the perfumed noble because she believes in him. Moved by Rianette's encouragement, Rick feels a surge of confidence. Just as he starts to regain his composure, a hooded figure approaches him, offering help through fortune-telling to address his midlife crisis. The figure assures Rick that there's no need to be suspicious and offers a free trial. Feeling reassured, Rick takes a seat with the figure. However, Rianette, noticing a spell on the seat, is too late to act as Rick disappears the moment he sits down. Fried, the hooded figure, praises himself for his Oscar-worthy performance in luring Rick into his trap. Just as he is about to leave, Rianette confronts him, demanding to know Rick's whereabouts. Fried tries to be evasive, but Rianette demonstrates her powers, and Fried spills the information under pressure. He reveals that Rick is not too far from the location, as Fried can only use teleportation magic within a 100-meter radius. Rick, now wondering where he could be, finds himself surrounded by mercenaries hired by the elite guards. Initially thinking there has been a mistake, Rick soon realizes that these mercenaries are indeed the elite guards of Diode, and Raster is behind this predicament. The guards promise to ensure he is in no condition to take the test. Disappointed by their dirty tricks, Rick learns from the chief guard that they are all equivalent to B-rank and A-rank adventurers, making it clear that he won't be able to escape unscathed. As Rick's masters, Braun, and others, suddenly appear, questioning why Rick is outside the arena instead of taking his test, Rick tries to cover up by claiming the guards are helping him train. However, the guards quickly debunk his claims and threaten to take down Rick's masters if they don't leave immediately. Rick begs the chief guard to call off his men, but the guard orders them to deal with the masters instead. One of the guards attempts to attack Braun with his sword, but the blade shatters upon contact. Braun expresses his disappointment, noting the guard's neglect in weapon strengthening despite his impressive physical training. Angered, the guard tries to throw a punch, only for his fist to be crushed effortlessly. Braun heals the guard's hand and advises him on improving his fighting form. The guards are astonished to see an orc not only capable of speaking but also using magic. The chief guard suddenly recognizes Rick's masters as members of the strongest party, Mitsit. Realizing that Rick is being bullied, Mitsit decides to handle the situation peacefully using his newest invention, a custom gun loaded with magic crystals and lead bullets. Meanwhile, the other guards, intimidated by Braun's apparent power, decide to target the other masters instead. Mitsit swiftly takes them down with his weapon, then offers Rick a chance to try it out. Rick declines the offer. The chief guard, now certain of his theory, concludes that they are indeed members of the strongest party. As tensions rise, another guard threatens to harm Alyssa if anyone moves, but Mitsit advises him to let her go for his own good. Alyssa wonders what the guard is doing, and Rick explains that he wants to have some fun with her. Alyssa, initially open to engaging with the guards, is provoked when the guard hurts her. She retaliates by unleashing a powerful high-grade nature magic that sends the guard flying, stunning everyone. The chief guard now recognizes Alyssa as the vampire mage, the youngest and strongest magic user, and identifies the others, the half-elf, half-dwarf Alyssa as the best weapons craftsman, and Braun as the orc with great intelligence and superhuman strength. The chief guard informs his team that they are all S-rank adventurers from the Orichalcum Fist, the continent's strongest party consisting solely of S-rank adventurers. So enthralled by their presence, the chief guard decides to retire and live in peace. Rick decides to return to his test while his masters handle the situation. Freed, still held hostage by Rianette, wonders how long she will keep him captive. Rianette responds that she will keep him until Rick returns. Freed tries to convince her that Rick won't come back, as he's walking into an ambush by his family's elite guards. Freed is astonished when Rick arrives unharmed and apologizes, while Rianette tosses him aside like a worthless rag doll. Just then, Lynx, looking hurt, walks into the room. Rick helps him to a bed, and Lynx reveals that Raster was the one who held him and faked his illness. Lynx recounts how Raster beat him up after he shared his dream of building a school for aspiring adventurers, deriding the dream as worthless and comparing it to his own third-rate status. Lynx, disappointed that he couldn't stand up to Raster, advises Rick to forfeit the exam to avoid a worse fate. Rick reassures Lynx that he will be fine and heads out toward the arena. Meanwhile, Raster easily takes down another participant. When one of his guards returns and apologizes for failing the mission, Raster is surprised that Rick still came out for the test. He had expected Rick to be discouraged by everything he had said against him. Raster decides to give Rick a taste of true suffering, but Rick is unfazed by his threats, silently promising to take him down for what he did to Lynx. Meanwhile, a guy named Adolf steps in and is going to tell us about the 4 cores of power in this world: strength, dexterity, magic capacity, and magic control. It just so happens that Adolf was born with a special ability to tell exactly how much power a person possesses by looking at them. To demonstrate, he examines a random person and sees that the guy is a total weakling. Expectedly, the weakling is taken out by Raster immediately. On the other hand, Raster is a powerhouse with most of his stats going into mana capacity, so it hurts a little for Adolf to look at him since scanning strong people strains his eyes. As a result, when he took a look at Rick, he straight up went blind. Meanwhile, on the stands, Rick's former co-worker approaches Rianette and introduces herself as Elisa Granger. Elisa mentions that she saw Rick with Rianette the day before, and when Rianette tells her that she's part of Rick's party, Elisa is overjoyed to hear that Rick has new friends. As everyone prepares to watch Rick's test, Rianette invites Elisa to join them, and she happily agrees and walks over to the seats. However, Elisa is shocked to see Braun, an orc, among them. Mitsit invites Rianette to sit next to him, but she politely declines, knowing Mitsit is guaranteed to harass her if she sits anywhere near him. Just then, Mitsit notices the girl standing behind Rianette and asks who she is. Rianette introduces her as Rick's former co-worker, and Elisa greets everyone. Mitsit, nervous about Elisa's huge personality, eagerly offers her the seat next to him, but Rianette is determined not to let Elisa fall victim to Mitsit's perverted intentions. At that moment, Rick steps out into the arena, prompting Braun to ask Rianette how she thinks Rick will perform in the exam. She confidently says Rick will pass the exam without incident, but Elisa isn't so sure it will be that easy. She points out that Raster is an A-rank adventurer known for using excessive force to beat down E-rank adventurers. But since Raster is only A-rank, Braun is confident Rick won't have any trouble. As the fight is about to begin, Angelica and a badly injured Free cheer for Raster to teach Rick a lesson. Raster, however, is puzzled about how Rick managed to escape the guys meant to beat him up, but he knows they are nowhere near as strong as him. Rick asks Raster why he became an adventurer, and Raster answers that he did it for the status. As long as he has a high rank, he used to be able to rookies for fun without putting himself in danger. He can also show his adventurer card anytime someone questions his authority. Hearing Raster's shallow reasons, Rick says he refuses to lose to him no matter what. Raster begins by firing a level 1 ice spell at Rick, intentionally missing, but Rick doesn't move an inch. Raster mocks Rick for being frozen in fear, but the real reason Rick stands still is because Reanette advised him to use the first minute of the battle to calm himself and observe Raster's movements. Raster prepares to attack Rick for real this time, casting a level 3 fire spell. Rick is impressed by Raster's quick casting but has to keep observing, so he can't dodge the attack. The fire blast hits Rick head on, and while Elisa is really worried about him, Rick turns out to be perfectly fine. Braun reassures Elisa that Rick is strong enough that a blast like that has no chance of damaging him. He explains that of the 4 cores of power, mana capacity must be developed from an early age, otherwise, one loses all hope of growing in that category. It usually has a limit of about 20, so since Rick became an adventurer at the age of 30, his mana capacity is really low, which is why he puts so much effort into training the other areas. Braun trained Rick in physical strength, pushing him to run between villages with giant 100 kg ankle weights attached and venomous snakes chasing him through the forest. Braun did everything he could to build up Rick's strength. Mitzit, on the other hand, focused on training Rick in mana control. It's honestly surprising that Mitzit didn't give up halfway through, given his dislike for hard work, but he was determined to ensure Rick could put up good magical defenses. Otherwise, Rick might have been a pile of ash by now. Mitzit also mentions that Reanette was the one who trained Rick in dexterity, which shocks Elisa since she thought Reanette was merely a maid. It turns out Reanette just enjoys wearing maid outfits for fun. Rick put everything he had into learning from his mentors, so he already possesses the power of an S-rank adventurer, although he doesn't realize it because Braun kept gaslighting him into thinking F-rank adventurers were much stronger than him. As Raster is about to cast another spell, he begins insulting Rick and Lynx for being too old to remain in the adventuring business. While hurling every elemental attack in his skill tree at Rick, Raster believes he must have either killed Rick or severely injured him. To his and his siblings' horror, Rick survived all of it without a single scratch. Raster, increasingly annoyed by Rick's resilience, decides to finish him off with his bare hands. He casts a strengthening spell on his hands and feet before rushing to attack Rick. However, as Raster throws a punch, Rick counters with one of his own, sending Raster flying back. Reanette's advice really paid off. Rick has watched Raster long enough to see the truth. Although Raster has a larger mana capacity, that's all he has. Raster never took the time or effort to truly refine his powers. While he has the potential to be stronger than Rick, at this moment, Rick understands that he is stronger than Raster. Raster tries to dismiss Rick's successful counterpunch as a fluke and decides to get serious, casting full incantation spells to take Rick out. While the spells look impressive, Rick is able to block them with one hand and even insults Raster for his sloppy spell execution. Elisa doesn't understand how Rick could possibly block such high-level spells with his low mana capacity. Mitzit explains that Rick has learned to master his mana control so well that even though Raster has more mana, Rick can use 100,000 times less mana to match Raster's spell casting. Raster's confidence starts to falter, so he tries one last attack to prove he's stronger. However, Rick is far too fast for him and delivers a punch that forces Raster to use iron body defense magic. By this point, Raster has realized that Rick possesses far more power than the average F-rank adventurer. Despite this, Raster still claims that Rick has just been getting lucky with his attacks up to this point. Rick, however, isn't falling for any more gaslighting. He knows that his success so far is due to his genuine strength. On top of that, Rick hasn't even used any strengthening magic yet he was able to overpower Raster after Raster used it himself. Raster, now unable to bluff his way out, asks Rick how he managed to become so strong despite having very little mana. Rick feels insulted by Raster's insinuation that he used some sort of cheat trick. He explains that he was thrown into a dragon's lair and wasn't allowed to leave until he defeated it. He was blasted repeatedly with extremely powerful explosions and then forced to swim through a swamp of monster goo until he choked on it. Elisa can't believe Rick survived all that, but in reality, Rick didn't survive. The process of healing magic is so powerful that, as long as it's applied quickly, No matter how many times Rick ended up dying, he was always brought back to life. That's how he managed to exceed his physical limitations. It's surprising how well Rick handled it, since none of his trainers had any regard for his safety. If Mitsit pushed him off a cliff for training and he died, he would just call Braun to heal him. The same thing happened with Elisa's and Rianette's training, leading to several life-threatening injuries. Raster doesn't believe any of it, though, since even if there was a way for Rick to train like that, he can't understand why Rick would willingly put himself through such hell. Rick explains that he has a dream of eventually killing the world's strongest monster, Kaiser Alcipate. Raster begins laughing at Rick, thinking the monster is nothing more than an old story. In truth, the monster is very real, and the main goal of the Orichalcum party is to one day eliminate it. Raster calls Rick dumb for believing in a children's story, but Rick doesn't care if Raster doesn't believe him, since his mission has nothing to do with Raster. Tired of listening to Rick's stories, Raster declares that he will end the fight once and for all. He uses a level 7 binding spell to hold Rick in place and then begins chanting for his strongest spell, the level 8 nature-composed magic. Raster believes that with this spell, the fight is won, as there's no way Rick could overpower such a powerful spell. However, Rick starts charging up a level 1 air shot to fight back. Raster laughs, saying a mere level 1 spell could never beat his level 8 spell. Yet Rick remains completely confident that his air shot will be enough to punch through Raster's spell. This confidence stems from the fact that Raster has used this level 8 spell only a handful of times and hasn't refined it to its utmost capabilities. On the other hand, Rick has used his air shot over 100 million times, allowing him to learn how to unleash its full potential. No one believes Rick's claim of having used the spell 100 million times, as it seems physically impossible to have done that in only 2 years. But Braun assures Elisa that Rick is telling the truth, explaining that he needed space-time magic to make such training possible. Raster still can't believe it and is ready to smash Rick into the ground to finish the fight. However, as he prepares to punch, Rick effortlessly snaps the binds on his arms and legs and clashes with Raster. Raster is confident he's won after landing his attack, but then his creature starts crumbling under Rick's power before finally shattering into pieces, sending Raster flying into the stands. Although Raster is still alive, his pride is definitely not. Hardly anyone can believe what they just saw, an E-rank adventurer defeating an A-rank. Rick's friends, however, totally expected this outcome. After Rick returns to the locker room, his friends come to congratulate him on his victory, especially Elisa, who is really impressed with his strength. Rick finally realizes just how strong he has become and is puzzled as to why he didn't notice it sooner. He thanks his friends for their excellent training, but they tell him there's no need to thank them so formally. Instead, they suggest going out to celebrate at a bar. Before they leave, Rick hears Raster and his siblings entering the room. Raster is clearly feeling the pain from Rick's punch but refuses treatment. When Rick sees him, he starts offering advice, telling Raster that there's a reason he lost the match. Although Raster doesn't want to hear any mockery, Rick is trying to give genuine advice. He explains that during his own training, he limited the number of techniques he used to master them fully. He suggests that if Raster wants to grow stronger, he should refine a single technique to perfection. Raster doesn't have to follow the advice if he doesn't want to, but Rick expresses high hopes for his future as an adventurer. It seems Raster has finally learned some humility, as he walks past Rick and tells him that when Rick's next promotion exam comes, Raster will ensure he is strong enough not to lose a second time. Raster then leaves with his siblings, but before leaving, Angelica lowers her head to apologize for the trouble she caused Rick and helps Raster out. With the E-rank exams officially concluded, an announcement is made for the candidates who passed. Rick eagerly awaits his results, while his friends start a preemptive celebratory feast for him, confident he will pass. Rick does end up passing his exam but seems much calmer than Rianette. As Rick prepares to face Raster's overwhelming spell, he recalls a moment from his childhood when he read a book about a hero battling the ultimate monster, Kaiser Alcipate, in order to obtain the Akashic records. Unfortunately, the hero fails to defeat the monster and leaves the records to be found by future generations of adventurers. This was the moment Rick decided he wanted to become an adventurer just like the one in the history book. However, his mother wasn't too keen on him pursuing such a dangerous career. She gently suggested that she would feel more at ease if Rick chose a different path. On the other hand, Rick's father was far less supportive, telling him to get a real job instead of throwing his life away as an adventurer. One day, after a routine checkup, Rick's physician congratulates him, revealing that he possesses an innate skill. Rick is in disbelief, as innate skills are incredibly rare attributes that set him apart from others, much like the hero Yamano. However, the doctor reminds Rick that innate skills can't be awakened through hard work alone, and it will take some time before he can use his ability. Despite this, Rick is thrilled, as it brings him one step closer to fulfilling his dream of becoming a successful adventurer and proving himself to his parents. The following day, Rick excitedly tells his friends about his innate skill, confident that once he can use it, his journey will be extraordinary. But weeks turn into months, and Rick eventually comes to terms with the fact that his innate skill may never manifest. His friends are sympathetic and encourage him to try becoming an adventurer anyway, as most adventurers don't have innate abilities and adventuring can be quite lucrative. Despite their encouragement, Rick's true motivation for becoming an adventurer wasn't the money but to emulate the hero Yamano. Unable to become the kind of adventurer he had hoped to be, Rick decides to pursue a real job after all. Rick informs his parents of his decision, and they are overjoyed to hear that he has finally given up on his dreams of adventuring and is ready to settle for a soul-crushing job like a normal person. The next few years pass with Rick learning the ropes as a receptionist and watching countless adventurers live out the dreams he once had. As time goes on, Rick becomes increasingly jaded to reality. Yet, he grows to accept his mediocre life and begins to find contentment in the time spent with his friends and family. One day, as Rick reflects on his journey, he realizes how far he has come and the unexpected path his life has taken. The battles he faces now, including the fight with Raster, are a testament to the strength he has built and the dreams he once held. While looking for his old books, Rick finds the storybook about Yamano's legend and the ultimate monster, Orichalcum. By now, it's nothing more than an old fairy tale he once believed in. Rick heads to work the next day, and at that time, Elisa has just been hired and is struggling to keep up with the paperwork. Rick helps her out, reminding her that there's no need to rush the learning process since she will get the hang of it sooner or later. He also warns her that monsters are becoming more active, so a quest to subjugate them might soon be available. Elisa is grateful for the heads up, as it allows her to prepare the necessary paperwork ahead of time. As Elisa leaves to handle the paperwork, one of Rick's adventurer friends walks in with exciting news. He has just returned from his promotion exam and proudly announces that he is now officially a rank B adventurer. Rick is happy for his friend but can't help feeling a pang of jealousy. Watching someone live out his dream of becoming an adventurer stings deeply. To cope with his jealousy, Rick does what any responsible adult might do: he drinks late into the night, trying to drown his pain. Despite his drunken state, the difference between himself and Zed becomes painfully clear. Zed has achieved rank B and is living the life Rick once dreamed of, while Rick has been stuck in the same job for 14 years with nothing to show for it other than a stable income and a few yearly pay raises. Rick wonders how far he could have gone if he had chosen to become an adventurer. Just then, Rick hears a commotion in the middle of town and decides to check it out to see if he can help. To his horror, he finds a mid-rank troll terrorizing the city. Under normal circumstances, Rick would have fled, but he notices a woman walking directly into the path of the troll. Unable to stand by and let someone get hurt, he runs out to protect her, even though he knows he can't do much to hold the monster back. As the troll closes in, Rick braces himself for a grim fate. Before anything can happen, Rianette steps in front of Rick and swiftly slashes the monster to pieces. Rianette then tells Rick that she appreciates his attempt to protect her but assures him there's no need to worry since she is a skilled adventurer. After that, Rick and Rianette walk together, introducing themselves. Rick is thoroughly impressed by Rianette's strength and asks if she is a rank B adventurer. Rianette corrects him, saying she isn't rank B, and Rick is astonished when she reveals her S-rank badge. The shock Rick feels is immense. S-rank adventurers are so powerful and rare that this is his first time meeting one. There are even rumors that HQ intentionally removes them from local guild registers and oversees their missions directly. Rick can hardly believe his luck in meeting such a legendary adventurer. As they talk, Rick decides to ask Rianette a peculiar question. He pleads with her not to laugh at him, to which Rianette assures him that she hasn't laughed even once in the 9 years since her 30th birthday. Rick isn't sure if that's something to be proud of, but he moves on. He tells Rianette about his childhood dream of becoming an adventurer and eventually defeating Orichalcum. He asks if she thinks he could still achieve his dream, despite starting his adventuring career at 30. Rianette, after observing Rick's actions earlier when he thought she was in danger, believes he possesses the courage necessary to become an adventurer. However, she stresses the importance of mana reserves for adventurers. Rick acknowledges that developing mana reserves is difficult, especially if not done during youth, but Rianette is honest with him. She explains that, given the importance of mana reserves to adventuring, it is practically impossible to build them up once one is older. Considering this, Rianette regrets to say that she doesn't think Rick could make it as an adventurer if he starts now. Rick was already expecting an answer like that from Rianette, but it still hurt to hear. At the very least, he finds closure in the fact that it was an S-rank adventurer who broke the news to him. With nothing left to do but give up on his dreams, Rick resigns himself to settling into his ordinary life. Rianette apologizes for making him feel bad, but Rick reassures her that it's fine. He appreciates her honesty and, despite the circumstances, is glad to have met someone as impressive as her. As a gesture of thanks, he jokingly invites her to grab a meal with him sometime. To his surprise, Rianette immediately accepts his dinner invitation and suggests meeting the next day. The following day, Rick is in a remarkably good mood and throws himself into his work with extra enthusiasm. When Zed comes in, boasting about his promotion to rank B, Rick shows no sign of jealousy and wishes him luck on his next quest. By the end of the day, Rick is happily skipping down the road to meet Rianette, hoping that their date might lead to something more. However, his plans are abruptly ruined when he hears screams of monsters attacking the town. Rianette was supposed to meet him nearby, so Rick assumes she must already be fighting the monsters. Determined to check on her, he rushes to the scene. When Rick arrives, he sees that Rianette is handling the situation well, but there are still many monsters approaching. She tells Rick to stand back while she takes care of the threat. Moments later, the battlefield is littered with monster chunks, and Rianette appears to have barely broken a sweat. Suddenly, she senses something that triggers painful flashbacks to the death of everyone she loved, causing her to fall to her knees in panic. A new monster appears right at that moment, and Rick, unprepared to defend her, feels helpless. Luckily, Zed arrives just in time to save them both. Rick is grateful for Zed's intervention but is puzzled about why he's here. Zed explains that the guild put out an emergency quest to subjugate the monsters, so he and others rushed over to help. He tells Rick to get Rianette to safety while they handle the rest of the monsters. As the adventurers fight the monsters, Rick's jealousy flares up again. When Rianette regains some composure, she warns Rick that it's dangerous for him to be there. Rick tries to reassure her that the B-rank adventurers will manage the remaining monsters, but Rianette tells him they won't be strong enough to handle what's coming next. She reveals that a dragon is nearby and that she won't be able to fight it due to trauma that causes her to lose control of her magic whenever she senses a dragon. Rick is skeptical that a dragon would appear in a town like this, but his doubts are dispelled when a massive dragon flies overhead. The guild's recommendation for dealing with a dragon is to stand still and hope it leaves. Despite this, a panicked magician breaks the rules and attacks the dragon, leading to the decimation of the B-rank group. Zed tells everyone to run, but they soon find themselves trapped by a barrier the dragon has erected, leaving them with no escape. Rick decides to face the dragon head-on. Zed tries to stop him, insisting that as a receptionist, Rick is ill-equipped to handle such a threat. However, Rick's desire to die with purpose, as an adventurer would, overpowers his fear. He picks up a rock and throws it at the dragon, which does nothing but serves as a catalyst to inspire the other adventurers to fight back, despite knowing they're likely to lose. The battle intensifies, and as the dragon's fire breath scorches the area, Zed uses his iron body skill to protect everyone. Though they survive, they suffer significant damage. Amidst the chaos, Rick stands up and walks straight toward the dragon, declaring that he will achieve his dream no matter what it takes. As the dragon prepares to crush him, Rick's dormant innate skill awakens, granting him the power to withstand the dragon's attack and push it back with ease. The surge of magic flowing from his body is so intense that it becomes visible. Realizing this must be his innate skill, Rick feels a renewed sense of confidence. He blocks the dragon's fire breath with his magical energy and, when the opportunity arises, delivers a powerful punch that pierces through the dragon's body, killing it instantly. Once the battle is over, Rick collapses to the ground from exhaustion. When he wakes up, he finds himself in a hospital bed, experiencing great physical pain. Rianette is there, and she informs him that he overloaded every magic circuit in his body during the fight with the dragon. By all accounts, he should have been dead. He had been unconscious for about a week, and the entire time, Rianette and the others had been worried about him. Rick, despite his weakened state, is grateful for the chance he finally had to prove himself. He knows he has a long road ahead to master his newfound abilities and fulfill his dream, but he's ready to face whatever challenges lie ahead with renewed determination. Rianette had stayed by Rick's bedside, her presence a comforting constant as he recovered from his battle with the dragon. She had been deeply moved by Rick's bravery and resilience, qualities that had rekindled her belief in his potential. She saw in him the courage and determination that aligned perfectly with the goals of her party, the Orichalcum Fist. When Rick finally woke up, Rianette's eyes lit up with determination. She wasted no time in speaking to him about her offer. She invited Rick to join the Orichalcum Fist, the S-rank party whose ultimate goal was to defeat Kaiser Alcipate, the very monster Rick had aspired to face. Rianette had seen firsthand that Rick possessed the heart and courage of a true adventurer, and she was confident that with the right guidance and experience, he could grow stronger and fight alongside them. For Rick, this was a dream come true. No one had ever supported his ambition to become an adventurer before, it had always been a distant fantasy overshadowed by reality. Hearing Rianette's faith in him moved him to tears. He felt a profound sense of gratitude and hope, emotions he had long suppressed while resigning himself to an ordinary life. Lynx's curiosity about Rick's life had led him up the mountain to a castle that seemed more fitting for a demon lord than an adventurer. He marveled at the grandeur of the structure and the security it implied. Despite the nerves bubbling within him, he summoned his courage and rang the castle bells. The massive gates creaked open, revealing Rick's familiar face. Rick greeted Lynx warmly, apologizing for the remote location of the castle and the seemingly dramatic setting. As Lynx walked into the castle's courtyard, he admired the serene surroundings and the absence of monsters, which Rick explained was due to some special wards around the castle. Rick's stern warning about wearing his best armor was clarified when he mentioned that it was to ensure Lynx's safety. This hint of danger only heightened Lynx's apprehension. Nonetheless, he followed Rick into the main castle, where he was welcomed by Rianette. Lynx's attention was soon diverted by the sight of Alyssar, Rick's another senpai, who was bursting with energy and playful magic. Lynx was taken aback when she casually cast a level 6 nature spell, nearly catching him off guard. Rick quickly intervened, scolding Alyssar for her lack of consideration. The playful chaos was quickly sorted out, and Lynx was reassured by Rick's protective nature. As Lynx was led to his guest room by Rianette, he gazed out the window, pondering the size of the castle and the peculiarities of its inhabitants. His thoughts were interrupted when he spotted Mitsit outside, tinkering with his latest creations. Mitsit welcomed Lynx and demonstrated a custom weapon he had crafted. Lynx was impressed by the weapon's potential, recognizing its value if mass-produced for the capital's army. Returning to the castle, Lynx was surprised to find Braun in the library, surrounded by books. Despite his initial surprise at seeing an orc in such a scholarly setting, Braun was friendly and explained his passion for reading and training. Lynx, impressed by Braun's intellectual side, inquired if he could receive training similar to what Rick had undergone. Braun, noticing the same passionate glint in Lynx's eyes that he had seen in Rick, agreed to help. Rick, meanwhile, was searching for Lynx and was informed by Mitsit that Lynx had gone with Braun for training. Rick was apprehensive, knowing how rigorous and intense Braun's training could be. Lynx's strenuous training included running with weights and facing tough physical challenges, which left him on the brink of exhaustion. Fortunately, Rianette arrived with a large hog for dinner, rescuing Lynx from another grueling exercise. Lynx expressed his gratitude, and Rianette noted the weights attached to his legs, understanding the harsh nature of Braun's training. She also revealed that Braun had been the source of Rick's trauma, which made Lynx appreciate the situation even more. After dinner, the atmosphere was lighter. Rianette poured tea for Lynx and Rick, and Lynx took the opportunity to praise Rianette for her hospitality and skills. Rick agreed, and Lynx inquired about the nature of Rick and Rianette's relationship. Rick was initially hesitant but admitted they weren't in a relationship due to the age difference. Lynx, being 20 years older than his wife, shared his perspective that relationships are about feelings rather than age, offering Rick a different viewpoint. During dinner, the conversation turned to Rick's innate skill. Lynx asked about it, and Braun explained that Rick's skill was unique, only activated under special conditions and beyond his full control. This insight gave Lynx a deeper appreciation for Rick's journey and the challenges he faced. As the dinner concluded, Lynx decided to take action. Seizing the moment, he dashed after Rianette, eager to express his appreciation and support for her. The rest of the evening was filled with warmth, camaraderie, and a sense of mutual respect among the group. Rick, watching Lynx's enthusiastic pursuit, felt a renewed sense of purpose and gratitude. Despite the trials and challenges ahead, he knew he was surrounded by friends and allies who supported him and shared in his aspirations. As Mitsit explained to Lynx, if Rick could fully control his reckless soul skill, he would be a powerhouse. Braun further elaborated that Rick was already at an S-rank level even without fully utilizing his abilities, and that he would surpass even them if he could master his skill. Lynx was astonished at the potential Rick possessed and wondered how someone could be so powerful. The conversation then shifted to the 6 Grand Orb magic crystals, which Lynx recognized from the legend of Yamada. Mitsit explained that these orbs were crucial for opening the gate to the Spiral region, where the formidable Kaiser Alcipate resided. The orbs, currently in their activation season, an event that occurred every 200 years, were emitting a strong mana. Rick asked Lynx if he had any current information about these orbs, but Lynx admitted he had not heard anything recently. He promised to check with his contacts in the Secret Intelligence Division that handles non-public quests. After the conversation, Rick sought Lynx's advice on relationships. He admitted to being unsure about how to handle his feelings for Rianette, given that she seemed to have everything under control. Lynx, with his experience, offered some insights, but the conversation was cut short as a new adventurer, Ray, caught their attention. Ray, feeling frustrated by her mundane guild chores and eager for field work, practiced her skills with a broom. Her ears perked up at the sound of a conversation from the reception area, and she ventured out to see Rick, Alyssar, and Bruston talking to the guild master. They were requesting a special quest, but the guild master initially denied their request because their party lacked the necessary 2A rank adventurers. Rick suggested hiring a temporary member, and the guild master offered Ray, who was keen on taking on a dangerous mission. However, Ray was less enthusiastic about teaming up with a party that included a talking orc, an elderly man, and a pampered child. Despite her reservations, she was called to order by the guild master and agreed to join the party. As they set out on the quest, Alyssar detected a light source ahead, leading them in that direction. Ray inquired about their mission, and Rick explained they were searching for the orbs, which were dangerous because they attracted monsters. Ray boasted about her ability to handle monsters despite being an F-rank adventurer, which inspired Rick to work harder towards his goals. However, Ray dismissed Rick's recent promotion to B rank, considering him a late bloomer. Alyssar pointed out the light source, and the party arrived at the scene to find a wyvern devouring its prey. Ray, terrified by the sight, hid behind the others, knowing the creature was formidable. Braun, however, approached the wyvern with his usual confidence. When Ray asked if he had a plan, Braun nonchalantly punched the wyvern aside, explaining he intended to deal with more monsters by attracting them. Ray was distressed, fearing Braun's actions would draw more wyverns from their nest. Bruston, exasperated by Ray's constant complaints, asked Rick to handle her. Rick led Ray away from the scene as she continued to express her frustration about being put in danger. He teased her about her self-perceived weaknesses, but Ray insisted she was worried about her future and not just the immediate danger. Suddenly, a defeated wyvern landed beside them, a testament to the other's prowess. Just as Ray was trying to comprehend the situation, a red wyvern, a far more dangerous creature, landed ahead of them. Ray, petrified by the sight of such a powerful monster, urged Rick to flee, but Rick insisted on staying to try something out. Ray, inspired by Rick's bravery, decided to stay and fight alongside him. Despite Rick's attempts to dissuade her, she was determined to support him, as they were now temporary party members. When the red wyvern charged, Rick took it on with unwavering resolve. To Ray's astonishment, Rick took down the dragon with a single, powerful blow, demonstrating his incredible strength and skill. The battle left Ray in awe of Rick's abilities, and she realized that being part of Rick's temporary party, despite her initial reluctance, was an opportunity she couldn't pass up. As the dust settled, Rick and Ray stood victorious, their bond as temporary allies solidified through the trial they had just faced. The next morning, Ray, still processing the previous day's events, returned to the guild. The guild master congratulated her for her performance, but noticed she seemed dazed. Ray apologized, admitting that the experience had been overwhelming. The guild master, sympathetic, recalled the memorable impact that members of the Orichalcum Fist had on people. He explained that they were all S-rank adventurers, which piqued Ray's curiosity. She was eager to become an S-rank herself, and after handing over the broom, she bolted out the door to pursue her dreams. Meanwhile, Rick and his party were busy making progress on their quest. Braun presented the red flower, one of the 6 grand orbs, to the others. By resonating the red flower with mana, Mitsit used his world mapping magic to determine its location. The orb was traced to Heritopia, a country renowned for its combat sports and home to the famed Colosseum. The history of Heritopia fascinated Braun, especially the legendary King Alexander, who had amassed 10,000 victories in the Colosseum and had become the kingdom's founder. Braun lamented never having had the chance to spar with Alexander, noting that such an encounter would likely have leveled the entire kingdom. Determined to find the orbs, the party began searching for information in Heritopia. However, their efforts were hindered by the fact that many townsfolk were intimidated by Braun, leading to their running away in fear. Rick suggested going to the town hall for more reliable information. As they prepared to leave, they witnessed a girl being harassed by a man. Rick was about to intervene when Braun stepped in, challenging the man to a fight. The confrontation moved to a dark alley, and moments later, the unmistakable sound of a skull cracking echoed through the area. Braun emerged, dragging the incapacitated man, now surprisingly contrite, and introduced himself as Gold. The girl, named Militia, also introduced herself. Braun showed them the red jewel and asked if they recognized it. Gold had seen something similar but couldn't recall where, while Militia also vaguely remembered the jewel. Just then, a parade for the King of Fists tournament began, capturing the attention of both Gold and Militia. They excitedly informed the party that the tournament, which drew over 500,000 spectators annually, would commence in 2 months. The parade was led by Kerwin Wolf, the 5-time champion of the tournament. Militia and Gold pointed out that Kerwin's championship belt featured the very jewel they were searching for. Intrigued, the party headed to the gym where Kerwin trained. Inside, Kerwin, having just finished a parade, was relaxing. When Rick and Rianette entered, Kerwin immediately sensed they were different from the typical fighters he encountered. The gym owner, wary of their uninvited presence, reprimanded them for their intrusion. Rick attempted to explain their purpose, but Braun, impatient, cut to the chase and demanded the belt. The gym owner, suspecting the party of theft, began to call for help, but Kerwin intervened. He claimed he could detect liars by scent and believed Braun's party was not lying about their intentions. However, the belt was a symbol of pride for Heritopia, and Kerwin could not simply hand it over. Instead, he proposed a challenge. Braun would need to become the new champion of the tournament to claim the belt. Braun accepted the challenge without hesitation, finding the condition fair. Rick, concerned about Braun's readiness to leave without the jewel, was reassured by Braun's confidence. The party departed, with the gym owner lamenting their rude behavior. However, Kerwin's comments about the party's strength had left the owner in cold sweat, realizing they were far from ordinary. The team's next steps were clear: prepare for the tournament, face formidable opponents, and prove themselves worthy of the red jewel. With their goal in sight, they set their sights on the grand challenge ahead, each member focused on their role in this high-stakes quest. Quinn states that from the way May carries herself, he can tell that she possesses a wide array of lethal skills. Then there's the normal-looking man who, while seeming unremarkable, has trained his body to an inhuman degree, making him someone not to be messed with. Finally, there's Braun, who, by every indication, is the most interesting of all. Meanwhile, outside, Braun explains to Rick and Rianette that he thinks they should all join the tournament as fighters so they can win the belt fair and square. In order to enter the tournament, one must first pass the preliminaries held in the east and west of the kingdom. After this, they need to win another match among those who qualify from the preliminaries, and only then are they allowed to participate in the tournament. Braun says he will apply through the eastern gate while Rick and Rianette can enter through the western gate, so they'll all be in different tournament brackets. Rick and Rianette are fine with the plan but ask Bruston if he will be okay getting around town by himself. There's no need to worry, since Bruston has already arranged for Gold to guide him around town. To register for the preliminaries, Rick and Rianette will need to pass a test, which is similar to the promotion exams at the Adventurers Guild. As Rick enters the arena for his test, he is informed that he will be required to fight a mock battle to gauge his strength. His opponent will be one of the newly recruited fighters from the previous batch. Rick asks if his opponent will be strong, and the examiner checks the forms, telling him that the girl he's going to be fighting has won every match up until now. However, whether Rick wins or loses, he will still pass the exam as long as he meets certain criteria. All of a sudden, the doors swing wide open, and a very familiar voice begins to introduce herself. She confidently declares that, because of her speed, people have started calling her the Flash, so whoever is up against her next better watch out. However, her confidence drains completely as soon as she recognizes Rick. Angelica asks why he is here, but he could easily ask her the same question. He's also a bit worried about being in the arena with her, considering their past encounter, but Angelica reassures him that her siblings aren't here with her, so Rick doesn't have to worry. Despite knowing how powerful Rick is, it's terrible luck for her to face him in a mock battle. Even though the loss won't have serious consequences, she wants to maintain her undefeated streak, so she decides to go all out from the start, hoping to overwhelm Rick with her speed. As she tries to attack, she falls flat on the ground. She thinks she must have tripped due to her nerves, so she gets back up and prepares to dash at Rick again. However, the same thing happens, and she realizes that she isn't falling because she's nervous but because Rick is doing something. Rick looks down at Angelica and asks her what she thinks of the new skill he's been practicing over the last few months. After realizing how strong he had become, Rick didn't want to risk hurting those around him in a fight, so he developed the 8 secret arts of going easy. Right now, he's using the first art, which consists of constant leg sweeps. This technique is highly effective because leg sweeps demoralize and incapacitate opponents as they struggle to get up, causing minimal damage. Angelica thinks it's insulting that Rick is using such a technique, but Rick points out that she hasn't been hurt because of the leg sweeps. Even though he's only using leg sweeps, he's executing them at a speed that Angelica can't keep up with, even with her exceptional speed. It would normally be impossible to pull off such a technique, but given the impressive feats she's seen Rick perform, she's not surprised he can manage it. She decides that the best course of action is to keep her distance from Rick, but every time she tries to back away, she still gets her legs swept. Despite the repeated leg sweeps, Angelica isn't willing to give up just yet. Rick is impressed by her determination and says he will fight her seriously from now on. However, as soon as he makes this statement, Angelica gives up, realizing that continuing would be futile. She's not foolish and understands that Rick's skills far surpass hers. Although Rick is a bit disappointed that the fight ended so abruptly, his victory means he is now recognized as a fighter and can compete in the preliminaries. Before Rick can head over to register for the preliminaries, Angelica comes running up to him, asking one more time why he had to come here. She starts crying, expressing how unfair it is that Rick always seems to overpower her. Her phrasing makes Rick worry that Rianette might misunderstand the situation. To defuse the tension, Rick suggests they all get something to eat to talk things out. They later go to a restaurant owned by Melicia's parents, and Melicia is delighted to offer Rick and Rianette some freebies. Rick appreciates the gesture, but before Melicia leaves, she asks if Braun will be coming to the restaurant as well, revealing that she has a crush on him. Unfortunately, Rick tells Melicia that Braun is registering on the eastern side of town, so they won't be seeing him for a while. Melicia is a bit disappointed but leaves with a smile. Once the three are alone, Angelica asks Rick why he decided to come here. Rick reveals that he's thinking about winning the tournament. Angelica is surprised at how casually he talks about winning. Rick then asks her why she came here, as he didn't think a knight like her would be willing to give up her sword and fight with her fists. Angelica responds that she has her reasons for wanting to be here and confirms that she plans to enter the tournament as well. Rick feels motivated to give it his all in the tournament, which surprises Angelica since she thought he was planning to compete in next year's tournament. She explains that to qualify for the preliminaries, one needs to have won at least 40 matches against other random fighters, and it's an exhausting process. Most people average about 10 matches per month, and with only a week left before the preliminaries start, it's unlikely that Rick will have enough time to fight all those matches without getting exhausted. However, Rick reveals that he has already requested 10 matches per day for the next 4 days, showing his commitment to the challenge ahead. The next day, Rick heads to the arena to begin his series of matches. His first opponent is a guy named Grit, but the coordinator warns Rick that Grit is rumored to be cheating by using a weapon, although this has never been proven in the arena. As Rick comes face to face with Grit, he notices that the guy looks shady but can't see any weapons, so he remains confident that he will be fine. As the match is set to begin, Grit pulls out an impact stone he had hidden in his shoe. Impact stones significantly increase the power of a punch, so when Grit punches Rick, a giant dust cloud is kicked up. By the time things settle, the only one injured is Grit, who now has 2 new elbows. Grit is bewildered, unable to understand what went wrong, especially since he had easily shattered boulders with the impact stone. Now it's Rick's turn to attack, and he uses his secret art of going easy. He throws a punch intentionally missing, so the air force from the punch will knock Grit out without causing any fatal injuries. Everyone is left in shock by what they have witnessed, and with that, Rick's first match comes to an end. It looks like the Tournament of Fists is going to be a real spectacle this year. Later, Rick and Rianette go to watch one of Angelica's matches, and she lives up to her title, The Flash, by swiftly defeating her opponent after kicking him straight into a wall. After the match, Rick and Rianette congratulate Angelica on successfully winning her 40th match, officially meeting the requirements for the preliminaries. Seeing Angelica complete her matches motivates Rick even more to do well in all his matches. However, Angelica is still stunned by Rick's plan to complete 40 matches in just 4 days. Rick, unfazed, doesn't see what's so difficult about it. Angelica explains that participants are only allowed to register for 1 match per day at each venue, and while there are more than 10 venues in Harapia, some are remote, up to 100 kilometers away from others. This makes traveling between venues and timing for matches nearly impossible. Rick interrupts Angelica, saying he has a match at the Green Hill venue soon. Angelica protests that there's no way he can make it in time since the venue is over 30 kilometers away, and even the fastest carriage won't get him there quickly enough. But Rick never mentioned taking a carriage running is faster for him. Angelica thinks it's a crazy idea, but as Rick takes a step and vanishes into a dust cloud from his speed, she realizes that she no longer deserves the title The Flash compared to his speed. While Angelica is still grappling with her loss of identity, Rianette asks if she would like to go watch Rick's match. Angelica definitely wants to, but doubts she can keep up with Rick's speed. Rianette offers to take her instead, but Angelica hesitates, feeling uneasy. Before she can respond, Rianette has already picked her up and begins jumping from roof to roof at high speed. Angelica pleads with Rianette to return to the ground, but Rianette insists on taking the faster route. Eventually, Angelica arrives at the arena, but she was so overwhelmed by motion sickness that she missed the entire fight. Rick mentions that he messed up in that match, needing more practice to make his attacks non-lethal, but he has to move on to his next venue. Angelica, dreading the idea of being carried by Rianette again, tries to back out, but Rianette has already grabbed her and is hopping through town once more. Rick continues to win his matches effortlessly across town, while Angelica suffers severe motion sickness from being carried everywhere by Rianette. When the 4 days are up, Rick has officially qualified for the preliminaries by winning all 40 matches. The next step is the tournament, and Angelica is relieved that she isn't in the same bracket as Rick, so she won't have to face him just yet. Rianette asks Angelica if she was hoping to win the tournament. Angelica admits she would have liked to win since she's participating anyway, but with Rick in the tournament, her chances of winning are virtually zero. On top of that, Braun is also participating, and though Angelica has never met him, Rianette mentions that Braun trained Rick, making him even more formidable. Despite her concerns, Angelica wonders if participating might still get her noticed by a certain person she'd rather avoid. Rianette asks who she's referring to, but Angelica doesn't want to explain, so she changes the subject and asks where Rick went. Rianette informs her that Rick went on a light 600 kilometers jog. Angelica is no longer surprised by Rick's absurd actions and asks Rianette how she can tolerate always accompanying him. Rianette reveals that she actually enjoys it and wouldn't mind if people started rumors about her and Rick being lovers. Angelica is shocked by Rianette's blunt confession, but their conversation is interrupted when a man approaches them, requesting help. Angelica initially thinks the man is hitting on them, but it turns out he's pleading for part-time workers because he's short-staffed. That day, Rick returns from his jog and is approached by a man named Snape, who is the chairman of the West League. Rick is curious how Snape knows him, but Snape explains that Rick has become quite famous for being the fastest man to ever qualify in the West League. As they shake hands, Snape's guard comes out of the bar and informs him that Angelica isn't present. Snape is disappointed to hear this, so Rick asks if he knows Angelica. Snape confirms that he and Angelica are quite close, though he's merely a merchant on good terms with the Dite family. Changing the subject, Rick inquires about when Snape retired from being a fighter. Snape is shocked that Rick knows about his past as a fighter, since he never mentioned it. Rick explains that he could tell from their handshake that Snape's hands were those of a trained fighter. Snape admits that he won a small tournament once, and the cheers of the crowd were an experience like no other, but that was 20 years ago, and he has long since retired. He's excited about fighting and mentions that his company is sending a fighter to the tournament this year, but he has other business to attend to. Snape bids farewell to Rick but asks him to pass on a message to Angelica, advising her to take good care of her body and not to play around too much. After Snape leaves, Rick heads inside, where Militia approaches him. She informs him that she saw Snape outside talking with Rick and advises him to be cautious. She mentions that while Snape appears to be a gentleman, there are rumors he is involved with the criminal underworld. Rick is surprised, especially since Snape is connected to Angelica's family, and it was a shock when Snape's company became the major sponsor for this year's tournament. As the conversation continues, Rick overhears some guys in the bar discussing how pretty the bunny girls outside are, and when they mention a dark elf bunny girl, Rick decides he wants to see this for himself. We cut to the front of the West League Stadium, where Angelica and Rianette are volunteering as advertising bunny girls. Angelica is putting a lot of effort into her role, though she's not doing it because she wants to. She couldn't bring herself to refuse the man's desperate request. Rianette, on the other hand, is only participating because Angelica agreed to do it. While the jobs aren't too bad, they deal with annoying drunk individuals. One such guy seems to enjoy harassing the bunny girls until they run away. When he tries to grab Angelica, she defends herself, delivering a severe beating while still remaining composed. Rick arrives and is shocked to see Angelica in the bunny outfit. Angelica, embarrassed, tries to explain that she's only doing this to help out, but Rick quickly shifts his attention to Rianette, with visible sparks flying between them. Angelica, caught in the middle, is left to watch the interaction with mixed feelings. Meanwhile, Quinn's coach is reading the newspaper and sees an article about Braun, noting how he completed all his qualification matches in just 2 days. The coach comments that Rick seems pretty tame compared to the ogre, but he's still impressed by Rick's ability to finish all his matches in 4 days. This excites him for this year's fights. The coach reminisces about the time he went to a rundown city in search of new talent. He walked into a bar and found Quinn, then known as the Hungry Wolf of the slums, having taken down an entire gang. The coach offered Quinn a chance to fight in Heritopia, where he could acquire anything he desired by winning fights. Quinn, excited by the opportunity, was convinced to join, and it has been a while since he has been this excited for a fight. The next day, the leagues are about to begin, and only one fighter from each block can advance to the tournament. The matches are expected to be fierce. The first fighter block features Angelica against a competitor named Helen. As the fight begins, Angelica seems to be straining more than usual, which is out of character for her. She eventually wins by kicking Helen into a wall, but she's already starting to get winded. Next up is Rick's match, where his opponent begins charging up a special move. Rick simply chops him across the neck, knocking him out. The rest of Rick's match proceeds in a similar fashion, with him effortlessly defeating his opponents. Angelica, despite her struggles, has been on a roll with her victories, but if she wants to guarantee her place in the tournament, she cannot afford to lose in her next match. Rick encourages her to do her best, but as he is about to offer some advice for her upcoming fight, Angelica walks off before he can say anything. Angelica's next match begins, and she faces off against a formidable opponent known as Tank. Despite her superior speed, her attacks are significantly less effective against him. In an effort to overcome his defenses, she incorporates magic into her strategy, creating a water prison around Tank and firing a bolt of lightning into it. However, Tank remains standing and mocks Angelica, taunting her about running out of steam. Angelica, exhausted from her efforts, attempts a blink step to close the distance, but her depleted stamina prevents her from moving quickly enough. Tank capitalizes on this, landing a powerful blow that knocks Angelica out. After the match, Angelica receives treatment with healing magic in the infirmary. As she exits, Rick is waiting for her outside, concerned about her well-being. Angelica is reluctant to talk, but Rick points out that her hasty approach in the fight contributed to her defeat. He acknowledges that her opponent had excellent defenses, making it a tough matchup from the start, but suggests that Angelica could have adjusted her tactics to conserve her stamina. Angelica is initially resistant to his advice, but Rick persists, sensing that she has something on her mind and wanting to offer support. Eventually, Angelica opens up about her situation. She reveals that after her parents died, she and her siblings were left in charge of the Dire Mood estate. As children, they quickly fell into financial ruin. To address their financial problems, their scheming grandfather made a deal with a man named Snape, who provided significant financial support in exchange for Angelica's engagement. This arrangement was meant to connect Snape to the nobility. Despite their efforts to restore the family's fortunes and avoid the engagement, it was too late to call it off. Angelica has since been trying to find a way to annul the engagement by investigating Snape. Just as Angelica finishes explaining, they hear a commotion coming from a nearby bar. They rush over to find the man who defeated Angelica, Taylor, arguing with a lizard man. The lizard man is holding a waitress by the neck, and Taylor attempts to intervene but is quickly overpowered and knocked out. Geez, the lizard man, mocks Taylor's weakness and continues harassing the waitress. Angelica, unable to tolerate the injustice, confronts Geez, despite knowing she stands little chance against him. Before a fight can erupt, Rick steps in, catching Geez's arm and urging him to calm down. Geez is about to escalate the situation, but Snape arrives and tells him to back off. Geez complies, and Snape apologizes for the trouble, explaining that Geez is his younger brother with severe anger management issues. Snape adds that there has been no one strong enough to keep Geez in check recently, although he does calm down relatively quickly when Snape intervenes. After Snape leaves, Angelica explains that Snape invested a significant amount of money into the engagement deal. To recoup his investment, he became a sponsor of the tournament and intends to use his sponsorship to influence the results through gambling rings. His plan is to use his fighter to ensure favorable outcomes and win a substantial amount of money. Angelica entered the tournament to take down Snape's fighter and force him to call off the engagement. Despite her determination, she admits that she currently lacks the strength to defeat Geez, the fighter Snape has likely chosen. Rick thinks about it for a second and then asks Angelica if she would like him to train her. Given the kind of training Rick went through, it sounds more like a death threat to her. Before they begin, Rick warns Angelica that she's about to undergo the most brutal training she has ever experienced. She tells him she's ready, impressing him with her determination. Rick straps some weights to her ankles and arms and asks her to start with a 30 km run. When she asks him to explain the training routine, Rick warns her not to forget her physical enhancement spell or she may not make it through the course. Rick attaches himself to her with a rope and kicks off running, dragging Angelica behind like a rag doll. As he continues dragging her along, Angelica wonders what kind of punishment he's subjecting her to. Rick explains that her body will adapt to fast movement if she gets pulled by someone faster than her, which will boost her flickering speed ability. Angelica begs Rick to stop for a break, but he takes that as a cue to turn things up, assuring her their training will end soon because she only has to keep up with him for 6 more hours. Eventually, the training session ends with Angelica sprawled helplessly on the ground, seeing visions of her parents calling out to her from another world. Rick is impressed that she survived, but Angelica is more concerned about her legs, wondering if they are still attached or if they got lost along the way. Rick recounts his own training experience with Rianette, telling Angelica that he was unconscious the first time he trained that way. Angelica is glad she survived her first day of training, unlike Rick, who had been revived 3 times. However, Rick tells her they will continue after her lunch break because it's just noon. Heartbroken by the news, Angelica begs Rick to end the torture, but Rick just walks off, telling her he will return in an hour. Angelica wonders why Rick occasionally becomes deaf whenever it suits him. She goes to a cafe for lunch, planning to avoid continuing her training, as Rick's methods felt more like torture than training. She has an internal conflict about her decision but convinces herself she is retreating tactfully to protect herself rather than chickening out. She's certain Rick won't find her in her sanctuary. However, Rick suddenly walks into view, surprised to find a cafe in the middle of nowhere and even more surprised to see Angelica there. He had been looking for her everywhere. Angelica is disappointed in her hiding skills because Rick found her just 15 minutes after she ran away. As Rick orders a cup of tea, Angelica grows impatient with his seemingly good guy attitude. She assumes he is there to scold her and tells him to get it over with. Instead, Rick reveals that he relates to her situation. He recounts how he ran away dozens of times during his training, even trying to escape to the afterlife, only to be repeatedly revived by Braun, who deprived him of his escape. Rick shares how he got used to losing his life multiple times and how Braun convinced him to keep going by suggesting his regret would be greater if he quit. After deeply considering Braun's words, Rick decided to see the training through. Angelica is impressed by Rick's ability to endure such bizarre training conditions for 2 years. She feels motivated because Rick's experience serves as a testament to the brutal training method. Rick tells her that Braun always gave him the choice to walk away, which made him feel better about the training routine. Angelica tells Rick she has always hated noble traditions, recounting how she has been trained as a noble from birth. Despite the extensive training, she realized she wasn't suited to be a noble and now wants to contribute to her family as a fighter. Her dream is to become the first special class female knight. Motivated by her dream, Angelica feels the scale is tipping in her favor, just as it did for Rick after his training. She follows Rick back to the training grounds, where he asks her about her fighting style. She confirms it's an arrangement of the knight's swordsmanship. Rick is certain she would become stronger if she fought with a sword, but Angelica reminds him about the tournament rule prohibiting weapons during duels. Rick suggests a different approach, modifying her hand to become a sword, turning herself into a weapon. He introduces Rianette as her special instructor to help with this new training, and Rianette eagerly agrees help. The next day at the arena, Angelica faces off against a new opponent named Silva. The commentator announces the matchup, telling spectators that the winner will qualify for the next round. Angelica's fierce demeanor surprises her fans and the old spectator's friend, who had hoped to witness her in her noble glory. The commentator signals the start of the match, and Angelica knocks out Silva with a single strike. Her victory is announced, and Rianette is satisfied with the result of their training. However, Angelica continues to struggle with the aftermath of the training, feeling traumatized and unsettled by the citizens' cautious glances. She wonders what she did in the match to warrant their wary gazes, but Rick reassures her that it was worth it because she secured a spot in the tournament. Rianette adds that even the citizens are now aware of how dangerous she has become. Angelica is surprised by this, as she didn't intend to give off such an impression. Alyssa arrives at the inn with Mitsit, and Rianette inquires about their search for the 6 orbs in the Empire. Mitsit reports that their mission was a bust, disappointing Rick, who is frustrated by the wasted effort. Mitsit attempts to flirt with Militia, but she gives him the cold shoulder. Gold arrives at the inn with Braun, and Militia is flattered, surprising Mitsit. Over dinner, Mitsit asks Braun about his side of the tournament. Braun is confident they will win and secure the orb. Alyssa expresses interest in the tournament, but Rick warns her that it would be a disaster because she would easily blow the arena away. Braun asks Angelica if she's participating in the tournament, and she confirms she is, adding that Rick is training her. Braun is surprised but impressed, while Rick praises Angelica for being a quick learner. Despite her progress, Angelica worries she doesn't have enough time to train adequately for the tournament. Braun reassures her that her efforts will pay off, and everyone joins in to encourage her. Their support lifts her spirits as Rick urges her to show everyone the full results of their training. The next day, the main tournament kicks off, with the arena packed with spectators cheering wildly. The announcer introduces the fighters who made it through the qualifiers, starting with the first matchup between Geese and Herman. Geese is introduced as the sponsored fighter from Dragonaut Company, owned by Snape. The second matchup is between Angelica and Doug, and the third is Rick versus Serena. Rick is relieved not to be matched up with Braun, as he would have forfeited his match. The announcer also announces the fifth matchup between Donnie and Bston, and the eighth between Eddie and Kerwin. Despite Kerwin's condition, his trainer is confident of victory. Angelica points out to Rick that Geese was placed in an easier bracket to avoid facing tough opponents like Braun or Kerwin. She explains that this is a match-fixing strategy by Snape to make Geese look unbeatable so Snape can bet on his opponent when the odds are astronomically against him. Rick understands the strategy now and is impressed by Angelica's insight. She promises to thwart their plans by making sure she faces Geese in the second round. Rick wonders what she would have done if she met him in the final, but Angelica assures him she plans to face Geese before then. As Rick and Bruston leave the arena, they are stopped by Kerwin, who expresses surprise at their presence. Braun reminds Kerwin of their commitment to take the belt from him, and Kerwin looks forward to their attempt to dethrone him as the reigning champion. Braun assures Kerwin that they will inevitably meet in the semifinals. Kerwin's trainer notices his excitement at the challenge, reminiscent of the first time Kerwin stepped into the gym. Back then, his trainer had spoken of a gym member who had reached the top 4 in the tournament, sparking Kerwin's eagerness to compete. His trainer set up a sparring match between Kerwin and Garan, the top 4 challenger, warning him that finishing off a challenger was prohibited and that weapons and armor were not allowed in the tournament. Despite these rules, Kerwin was eager to prove himself and take down Garan. Although he lost the match, his trainer was impressed by his performance and believed Kerwin would become a great fighter with more training. After his first match, Kerwin's attitude changed dramatically. He trained harder, driven by the desire to defeat Garan and improve his skills to face even stronger opponents. Kerwin eventually won his first tournament, defeating his opponents with ease and being crowned the champion of the King of Fists tournament. It had been 6 years since his initial victory, but his trainer still saw the same gleam in his eyes, a reflection of the determination he had seen when Kerwin first started training. The tournament resumes with Geese versus Herman, but the fight quickly turns uneventful as Geese becomes bored with Herman's weak punches. Despite Herman's attempts to intensify the fight, Geese casually swats him away, knocking him out with an accidental strike. Geese is declared the victor but walks off, visibly annoyed by the spectators' cheers. Angelica acknowledges Geese's strength, but Rick notes that Geese's movements suggest an amateur level of skill despite his strength. Angelica dismisses this, saying that Geese has already impressed the crowd with his power. In the subsequent matches, Angelica, Rick, and Braun win their bouts and advance to the next round. The last match of the first round features Eddie vs. Kerwin, and the spectators are eager to see the spectacle. Eddie tries a feint, but Kerwin reads his movements and knocks him down. Rick figures out that Kerwin anticipated Eddie's attack, as Braun explains that Kerwin can perceive his opponent's movements through his heightened sense of smell. Kerwin's strength impresses Braun, but an exclamation from the crowd draws attention back to the match, where Eddie has managed to knock Kerwin down. Braun is surprised, but Rianette clarifies that Kerwin allowed himself to be hit intentionally. Kerwin quickly recovers and, as Eddie rushes at him, Kerwin delivers a powerful strike, knocking Eddie out and securing his victory. The announcer expresses excitement for the continuation of the tournament. The next day, Rick and Rianette eagerly anticipate Angelica's match against Geese to see the impact of her training. Snape approaches Rick, requesting permission to sit beside him to watch the. Snape tries to act friendly towards Alyssa, but she sees through his pretense and tells him to drop it. Rick wonders why Snape isn't sitting with the other VIPs, and Snape reveals he wants to witness the match between his fiancée and his brother up close. Geese, suffering from a hangover due to excessive drinking the previous night, encounters Angelica on his way to the arena. He doesn't recognize her at first, but she introduces herself as his opponent. Geese recalls Snape's morning instructions to avoid injuring her face for their wedding, and he laughs off Angelica's threat to show him the results of her training. He boasts about his strength, insisting that despite not training, he is still stronger than she is. Angelica, annoyed by his arrogance, vows to put him in his place. The match begins with Angelica using her speed attacks, but they prove ineffective against Geese. She removes her strengthening magic, surprising Snape, and Geese tells her to forfeit the match due to the overwhelming odds against her. However, Angelica utilizes her new blink step skill, combining it with her thread slice ability to pierce through Geese's thick skin, leaving him stunned. Angelica is engaged in a major confrontation with Geese. She unleashes her full power and delivers a serious injury to Geese using the thread strike. Rick rejoices at this development, but Snape is astonished, questioning how Angelica could inflict such a severe wound when even one of the swords couldn't scratch Geese's skin. He acknowledges Angelica's immense power and reveals that this technique is one of the secret body control methods taught to her by Reanette. We then see a flashback of the powerful strike, which Angelica executed using only her bare hands, without magic. This technique is known as the thread strike. Rick, impressed, asks Angelica to learn the technique herself. Angelica is surprised and doubts her ability to master it, considering it nearly impossible. However, Reanette assures her that it's not impossible. He explains that Rick learned it with great ease by feeling the air and swinging fluidly yet with great force. Determined, Angelica trains harder than ever before, driven by her willpower. She eventually succeeds in learning the technique despite the difficulty. Returning to the present, Reanette explains that Angelica achieved this by combining the techniques of magical flow and reverse reflection, reimagining them in her own unique style. This technique releases the magical energy stored within the body in a short, but more powerful burst than usual. After a month of intense training, Angelica is fully prepared for the duel. We return once more to the battlefield where Angelica uses the thread strike a second time, injuring G. Enraged, G attempts to hit her, but Angelica's agility allows her to easily dodge his attack. She uses the thread strike again, further angering him. In response, G stirs up dust from the ground, obscuring Angelica's vision. As Angelica struggles to locate him, G reappears behind her and delivers a powerful blow, slamming her into the wall. He warns her that he won't go easy on her again. G then turns to his brother, Snip, and apologizes for his actions, admitting that he can't resist such an entertaining opponent. Deciding to unleash his full power, G prepares for a more intense battle. Angelica, rising once more, attempts another technique, but G easily reads and dismisses it as a simple move that anyone could use. He strikes her again, and Rick grows increasingly concerned for Angelica. Snip begins to explain G's true strength by recalling the past. He describes how, when he was a famous boxer, he first met G, who was then his adoptive brother, not related by blood. They met when G was 8 years old and trained together in a fierce match. G defeated Snip so thoroughly that he could barely stand, which led Snip to decide to retire from boxing. Back in the present, Angelica struggles to get up, catching her breath. G taunts her, asserting that no amount of training will ever be enough to stand against him. He mocks her and her family, demeaning her parents and hitting her so hard that it draws blood, showing no mercy. G challenges her to demonstrate the results of her training and show him everything she's got. Despite his brutal attacks, Angelica refuses to give up, determinedly trying to stand once more and declaring that he will never defeat her. G grabs her by the hair, lifts her into the air, and scolds her again, calling her trash and belittling her efforts. Angelica, talking to herself, repeats, "I will never lose." She remembers the scales Rick mentioned and realizes her deep desire to win. She extends her hand toward G, but her body refuses to move. Infuriated, G throws her against the wall, threatening to kill her if she tries anything like that again. He then reveals his deadly claws. Rick, now deeply distressed, tells G to stop, stating that the match is already over. G, still enraged, charges at Angelica with the intent to kill her. However, Rick intervenes and manages to stop him. G wins the match without killing Angelica, but his anger remains unchecked. An ambulance arrives to take Angelica to the treatment room, where she will receive care for the severe pain from the numerous blows she endured. Meanwhile, G heads to confront Rick, blaming him for losing the opportunity to kill what he considered the perfect prey. In a fit of rage, G attempts to strike Rick. Rick quickly dodges G's attacks and tells him that there's no point in defeating him here. He promises to humiliate G in front of all the spectators, which frustrates G, who cannot stand waiting until the next day. The following day, Rick competes in a match against Gladiator and emerges victorious. Afterward, he visits Angelica. The nurse informs him that Angelica has sustained significant damage and will need time to recover, but her life is not in danger. Rick is concerned for her well-being, noting that her intense training and reckless pushing of her limits were detrimental. He emphasizes that while she could not give up on her dreams, she must also recognize the limits of her body and the need for proper recovery. Meanwhile, Brun is seen fighting an opponent, finishing the match with a single, impressive blow that leaves everyone in awe. In another match, Clyan easily defeats his opponent. After these events, it is announced that the semi-finalists for the 113th King of Combat tournament have been determined. The next morning, Angelica is at school, looking very sad. Rick approaches her, offering comfort and advising her not to push herself too hard. He explains that while healing through holy magic can mend injuries, it does not always equate to complete recovery, as deep damage and fatigue may persist. Angelica does not initially respond but later apologizes, expressing regret for having trained so hard despite feeling it was pointless and for wasting Rick's time. She reflects on her own perceived lack of talent and her rebelliousness against the noble role imposed upon her in pursuit of her dreams. As she contemplates her future, Angelica muses that marrying Snip, as was suggested, might not be so bad after all. He would likely treat her well, and she might not need to work at all. Rick responds to Angelica by saying that he should be the one apologizing. She gave everything she could, and it was his mistake for not recognizing G's true power. He then encourages her to watch the upcoming match closely, promising to reveal what lies behind his training. The scene shifts to the semi-finals, where the first match features G against Rick. G taunts Rick, suggesting that if he had killed Angelica the previous night, she wouldn't have had to endure her miserable life, tormented by her lack of ability. As the first round of the semi-finals begins, G mocks Rick, daring him to display the results of his so-called hard work. Suddenly, Rick charges at G, asserting that even a common man's strike can bring a genius to the ground. He adds that G's pathetic appearance makes him reluctant to continue hitting him. G attempts to strike Rick but fails. Rick counters with a powerful punch to G's stomach, causing him significant pain. Angelica is shocked by Rick's strength, while Reanette comments that Rick hasn't even used his full power yet. He explains that Rick is employing a body control technique known as the penetration strike, where the force of the blow doesn't damage the exterior but travels inward, causing internal harm. Rick then tells G that if he wants to surrender, he should do so now. Furious, G retorts, "You must be joking. Don't underestimate me." He then uses his magic to attack Rick, but Rick skillfully dodges all his strikes. Brun notes that Rick appears to be using this round to achieve a specific goal and is likely expending a lot of his magical energy in the process. Snip adds that G has never truly trained his magical abilities and is relying solely on his natural-born power. Rick speaks to G, questioning if he understands how much trouble his own magical power has caused him. He then rushes at G and strikes him again, but the attack has no effect. G, with his iron-like body, taunts Rick, stating that a genius's victory over an ordinary person is both obvious and boring. G charges at Rick once more, but Rick skillfully dodges his attacks. Rick acknowledges G's endurance, noting that G is now breathing heavily. G is puzzled, wondering how Rick hasn't bled despite enduring numerous blows. Rick explains that the technique he used dissipates the force of attacks within the body, preventing significant external damage. Enraged, G accuses Rick of mocking him and slacking off the entire time. Rick calmly responds that while it might seem that way, G's assessment is somewhat correct. He reveals that he deliberately limited his physical abilities to match Angelica's level and fought with all his strength. The scene shifts to Rick's friends discussing the match. Brost remarks that winning isn't the only goal, he wants Angelica to see her own potential through this fight. He asserts that this match is, in essence, Angelica's fight against G. Back in the arena, G grows furious and demands of Rick, "Do you dare play such silly tricks on me? I will crush you without mercy." Rick calmly advises G not to tire himself out and to consider his remaining strength. Ignoring the advice, G uses his power to strike Rick, but Rick dodges the blow and counters with impressive force, leaving G astonished by Rick's strength. Rick tells G that his magic is falling apart because he is too exhausted to understand how things have come to this point. He adds, "You've never put in enough effort to even feel tired." Snip comments that Rick's abilities surpass G's innate talent, but G's friends respond with skepticism, claiming that it's impossible since Rick isn't intelligent enough to reach such a level. Angelica interjects, pointing out that despite Rick's lack of natural talent, it's crucial to acknowledge that he started training after a long period of focusing on building his magical reserves. Rick continues to explain to G, "Since you've never felt tired before, you don't know how to move when you're exhausted. That's why you can't maintain precision in your techniques." Rick continues, "Those who work hard push themselves even when they're fatigued, continuing until they can't move anymore. The strength gained after exhausting oneself is the truest form of strength." G, infuriated, attempts to deliver a powerful blow with his iron fist, but Rick easily blocks it. Rick tells him, "With this strength, you're relying only on your natural abilities. You're still at the first level. True geniuses take their innate physical fitness and senses and work harder than anyone else to refine them. I've seen geniuses at levels 100, 1000, and beyond," referring to his friends who trained him. Rick adds, "I'm sure you think you're the strongest in the world, but the truth is you've only faced opponents you could defeat. The world is vast, and you're just a small lizard in a pond." This enrages G even more, and he demands Rick to stop talking. G's body then transforms into a massive, muscular form, fully turning into a Reanette dragon, the greatest magic of the Dragon King. Angelica is astonished by the transformation, and Snip explains that dragonkind's origins lie in the ancient dragons, and G has awakened that ancient blood. G launches a powerful attack on Rick, and Rick's defensive techniques prove ineffective as G's assault sends him crashing into the wall. Rick attempts to counterattack, but his strikes have no effect on G, whose body now seems metallic and whose attacks have become incredibly fast. Rick remarks, "You're lucky in this form that Angelica couldn't defeat you. But giving up isn't an option for her. She trained herself to the point of death for 6 months just for this." At that moment, Rick quickly moves behind the dragon and strikes with incredible speed. His attack finally lands, and Rick moves so fast that G can't even see him. Watching Rick fight, Angelica reflects on her own abilities, realizing that her current capabilities don't compare. She acknowledges that her swift footwork, developed through a year of intense training, is her true strength. Rick then declares, "Ordinary hard work can't overcome the gap in natural abilities. It requires a level of madness to keep putting in extraordinary effort. You can work yourself to death for a month and still lose. To win, it would require a year of the same hard work." Angelica recalls a time when she cried after dropping her sword, only to pick it up again. In her memory, she declares, "I was born with a balance that only tips in one direction." Back in the present, Rick continues using his incredibly fast technique, eventually landing a powerful blow on G that knocks him to the ground. Rick addresses G, "The only way to win now is to have the courage to fight with everything you've got. But that's the very behavior you've despised until now. If you're capable of that, I'll face you head on." G angrily responds, "Why would I do something stupid like that?" Rick calmly replies, "I think it's time to end this." Enraged, G calls Rick worthless, pathetic scum and strikes the ground with such force that dust covers the entire area. Rick, still fighting at Angelica's level of strength, focuses on feeling the air and slicing through it lightly and precisely. At that moment, he uses the thread strike, unsure if it will work this time. To his surprise, it lands a severe blow on G, who falls to the ground defeated. Rick turns to Angelica, who is overjoyed by their victory over G. With the battle concluded, Rick emerges as the champion of the fight, marking the end of today's episode. Stay tuned for more exciting episodes of this amazing anime. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell to receive all the latest updates.